Well, thank you everyone for joining me for this 1-hour webinar titled PeopleTools Tips and Techniques. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Jim Marion. I've been in the PeopleTools community for roughly 2 decades. You may have read some of our books, attended one of our conference sessions, or perhaps read our blog posts or seen our YouTube channel. Now, I started my PeopleSoft career as a PeopleSoft customer, building solutions for a PeopleSoft financials implementation. After about 5 years, I had the opportunity to join Oracle, working across product lines and development teams. And I want to say, working for Oracle was such an incredible opportunity. Now today, we offer PeopleTools training classes in live, virtual, and on-demand recorded formats. You can find a list of our upcoming classes and recorded classes on our website. Now we write our own material and teach topics such as Fluid, REST, JSON, PeopleSoft Test Framework, Approval Workflow Engine, drop zones, event mapping, application classes, as well as the basics such as Query, PeopleTools, PeopleCode, App Engine, and so on. But today, I want to share some ideas about specific PeopleTools topics. For example, let's configure some event mapping, and likewise, let's add content to a drop zone. And while we're at it, let's use JavaScript to transform PeopleSoft. And sticking with the theme of configuration, I want to share an idea for Classic. It's a way we can combine JavaScript with common PeopleTools concepts to help our users better understand their data. So starting with event mapping, let me introduce you to the scenario. It is direct deposit. So let me navigate in here to self-service, payroll and comp, and direct deposit. Now, direct deposit contains important confidential information. When a bad actor compromises a system, the hacker is interested in money, either directly, as in direct deposit paychecks, or something to sell. So direct deposit is a component we want to heavily guard. And as delivered, we can see that Oracle is masking the account number, which is great. I mean, it's difficult to harvest data you can't see, right? Let's say that we also want to partially mask the routing number. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use event mapping to mask the routing number. Now, since this is event mapping, the first question we need to ask is, well, what event? So for each row, we want to invoke a field method, and that method is setDisplayMask. Okay, so row init seems appropriate. It's going to happen once for each row. The next question is row init of what? And what is the field we'll be masking? Those are great questions. So let's investigate. So let's start with the J control key combination. And that'll give us the page name. And with that, we can go into Application Designer, open the page, and start doing some investigation. And let's see. Oh, interesting. Doesn't look like there's anything in this page. Well, that's kind of interesting. How do we get from this in App Designer to what we see here online? Let's go back and look. Oh, look at that. I see there's actually a sub page here embedded. And let's drill in. So view definition, and let's scroll down here. Now the technique that we see there, the primary page with an embedded subpage. It's a very common pattern you'll see with Fluid. It usually starts with Oracle knowing they already have a classic version of the page, and then saying, okay, let's create a Fluid version. So they create a new Fluid page and then take the classic version, they clone it, convert it to a subpage, and drag and drop into the new Fluid page, Fluid layout. They documented that for us in a red paper titled Converting Classic Components to Fluid. You can find that on my Oracle support. Anyway, let's drill in. And let's find that, oh, there it is. Here's a grid, accounts grid. And if we look back, it says accounts, perfect. Going across the columns there, I see routing number. Routing number, that's exactly what we're interested in. Let's go ahead and open the properties of the routing number field. And I see record is PYICDDFLVW. Let's save that. We're going to want that later. We're going to want to write code to record.field.setDisplayMask. So let's go ahead and set that aside. And we also want the field name. So let's grab the field name. And let's just go ahead and finish writing the code right now. Set display mask. What's the mask character that we want to use? Now, if we look back, we see Oracle is using X's. It would probably make sense to do the same thing. But I think in this case, I want to use an asterisk just to be different. Now, my experience, you can put anything you want to right here. You could put a symbol in here. You know, a lot of times the password will have the dot. So you could go out to a website, find out what's the Unicode character for the dot, and you could actually copy and paste that off of another web page into your people code and use the dot character. And how many characters do we want to leave exposed? Well, the typical seems to be the last 4 exposed. So let's do that. Let's leave the last 4 exposed. Okay, so we have our code written. Now the next question is, where would we put this? Well, if this were a customization, we would open the component, go directly into the row init event of the PYICDDFL record, and then paste this code into row init. But this is not a customization. We want to do it as a configuration. So the next step is to place that code in an application class. And since application classes are children of application packages, let's start there. Let's create an application package. So new application package. And let's have this application package hold all of the event mapping code for the direct deposit component. Now, the point of event mapping is to eliminate customizations. The code we would have put in an Oracle delivered event, in this case row init, will instead reside in our own application class. Oracle won't know about our code. Compare reports won't show our code. The idea is that we should be able to generate a change package from a PUM image, compare it to our dev environment, and find no changes because we haven't made any changes. That's the value of event mapping. Move customizations into configurations to simplify lifecycle management. But here's a very important question. Does it really simplify lifecycle management? It does, but wait. So the idea is that Oracle's code provides the baseline, and through configuration, we are applying changes at a layer above Oracle's baseline code. Theoretically, this is amazing, but here's the problem. Oracle's changes might impact our code. Let me give an example. Our code references a record and field that exists today, so it works fine. But let's say we apply some maintenance, and Oracle removes that field. A compare will show no changes, so we receive no notification that something changed. But at runtime, we see a message saying, code refers to a field that doesn't exist. I don't know about you, but if I went from vanilla to vanilla after an update and saw an error message, my first call would be to my Oracle support to say, the component was broken. But was it? No, the problem exists up one layer, in the configuration layer. And unfortunately today, there's no tool to help us with this issue. So here's what we've done. First, we have a SQL script on our blog that shows all components within a project that use event mapping. So with maintenance, for example, a change project would include a list of components. If any of those components use event mapping, they would show in the report. We can then evaluate event mapping for any issues. Now, our second line of defense is structure and naming conventions, and that's what we're going to do here. Let's name our application package after the component. So let's get the component name. And then back to Application Designer, we'll supply a name. And let's give it our site-specific prefix. Let's go with web. And let's end with EVT. Say this is for event mapping. So any event mapping for this one component would be in this package. At any time, we can see all event mapping for this component by opening this one package. And inside the package, what we'll do is we'll create a sub-package structure modeled after the component buffer and the events. So in this case, it's going to be the row init event of a record called PYICDDFLVW. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a sub-package and then a class named row init. And then say, for example, if we had other code such as perhaps component say post change people code, that would go right here on the root. But in our case, our code is going to go down a couple of structures into row init. Let's go ahead and grab that code. And then I'll paste it here. Oh, but wait, this is an application class, isn't it? So we actually need that application class wrapper. Now, interesting thing about all event mapping people code, it uses the same template. So I happen to have a template that I use that we share with students in our class. I'll copy that template and paste it here into the code editor. And the code that we want, the to-do code, what we're going to do, I'll place that in the execute method in place of the to-do placeholder. And I'm about to say, but before we do, I want you to see something here in Application Designer. So I zoomed in, and we can see the name of this application class is row init. But the class for my template is named change me. Watch what happens when I press the Save button. PeopleSoft fixes it for us. It's now called row init. Isn't that great? If you have an application class without a constructor, then PeopleSoft will rename it for you to match the structure of the application package. Okay, so the next step is to define a service. So online, in a new window, I'm going to navigate into PeopleTools, Portal, Related Content Service, and then define Related Content Service. And let's add a new value. Let's give it a site-specific prefix here. How about web? And what is this? It's PY or DD. And what are we doing? We're masking the routing number. Mask. Let's try it. RT and BR. It fits. Okay, good. And let's give it a service name. Mask routing number. Oh, almost fits. NBR. Okay, and now the URL type is going to be application class. Now, a service definition is an abstraction over an implementation. The related content framework loads content from a variety of different types of services. The framework delegates loading to the service, and the service determines what and how to load. So what we're doing here is identifying what and how to load the content. Now, all event mapping services are application classes. So that's what we've done here. We mark this as an application class service. And then we specify the package, which was, what was the prefix? Web. And the path is going to be, we're following the structure of the component buffer. The record, what's the object for the event? And then we named our class after the event. Again, it's just a naming convention. You don't have to follow it if you don't want to. Okay, so now that we have defined the service, we can move on to mapping. So on to manage related content service. Now here's where Fluid gets a little bit challenging. We have to locate the target content reference. So this is a bit of a misunderstanding with event mapping. Event mapping isn't associated with components. It's associated with content references. And a content reference is a menu and component combination. So event mapping applies to menu component combinations. And this is important. See, a lot of components exist on multiple menus. For example, in HR, the job data component is on multiple menus. Or in PeopleTools, the nodes component is on multiple menus. So it's the same component, but multiple content references. In fact, this is why many people find event mapping doesn't work with component interfaces. Actually, it does. You just have to open the component interface and specify the menu. And now, what makes this difficult for Fluid is we have to locate the content reference in Portal Structure and Content. See, if I go to the Event Mapping tab, scroll to the bottom, it says Map Application Classes to Component Events. I need to locate it. But if this component, as in Fluid, is loaded from a tile, from a work center, from an activity guide, or any other type of business process-based navigation, that component may reside anywhere. That content reference may be anywhere within the portal registry. Usually, if it's Fluid, it's in a hidden folder. And to make it more confusing, the navigation you use online may not point to the content reference. Here, let me show you. In a new window, I'm going to navigate to Self-Service, Payroll and Comp, Direct Deposit. And this looks right, doesn't it? This is the Fluid component we want to map to. But the content reference at this location is classic. PeopleSoft is using something called conditional navigation to send me to Fluid, even though I chose the classic navigation. So here's the problem. With event mapping, I can configure the component content reference at that location, but it's the wrong content reference. This is the classic content reference. We want the Fluid content reference. So where is it in the portal registry? I don't know. That's the challenge. So how do we find it? And that's a really good question. That's where we're headed next. This is one of my favorite tools. So how about another new window? I'm going to navigate into, this is not PeopleTools this time. It's Enterprise Components. It's a new tool, but it's in Enterprise Components. Down here at the very bottom, you'll Find Object Navigation. So what we do is we give it a component name. Let's grab the component name. I'm going to cheat, grab it from the URL. That's not usually a good idea, but I know it'll work this time. Put in the component name, press the search button, and it'll tell me the navigation within the portal registry to this component, the Fluid version. And we see here, let's see, it says direct deposit, it says direct deposit. But where are these? Let's see. This is P&A fluid components. I feel good about that one. This one, navigation collections. No, don't use that one. If it says navigation collections, odds are really high it's a content reference link. Likewise, there's no label there. Probably a content reference link. Now this one down here, Fluid Pages Employee Self-Service Direct Deposit. I'm not sure about that one. Let's try this one though, P&A Fluid Components. So it's probably hidden because it's fluid, so I'll check the box. And in self-service, what was that path? P&A Fluid Components. There's direct deposit. Let's try it. Okay, so now which event do we want to map to? We want to map to row init, which is going to be a record level event. So let's go ahead and insert a new row here. And we want to map to the record PYICDDFLVW. I'm going to open the prompt, but oh, that's interesting. I don't see any records available. Actually, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because if we look back at the page design in Application Designer, there are no fields here. The fields are in the subpage. So here's a problem. In 855, we called it a bug, but in 856, we reclassified it as a limitation. And here's the limitation. Event mapping only shows records from top-level pages within the component. The top-level page for this component, for this page, has no records, just a subpage. Now, if this were 856 or earlier, our event mapping session would end right here because we can't go any further. But this is 858, and as of 857, we have a workaround. Now, this is really exciting. 857 introduced drop zones. Now, we'll talk about drop zones in a few minutes. But let's say you use a drop zone to add content, and now you need to initialize that content with people code. Okay, so where would you do that? Where would you put the people code? In the component, right? Actually, no, for two reasons. Number one, that would be a customization. And number two, the component only knows about design time content. A drop zone is runtime content. So it isn't even possible to customize a component for something like a drop zone. So the PeopleTools team thought this through, and they knew we would need people code. And they said, event mapping is the perfect solution. But there's just one problem. You can't map to records that don't exist. And that's why you see the unrestricted prompt checkbox available here. We can check the unrestricted prompt checkbox and select any record in the database. Now, the point of using a prompt is to protect us from selecting records or the wrong record. But when we choose unrestricted prompt, it's on us. We now have to ensure that we're selecting a valid record. But this is perfect. This is exactly what we need to fix the bug from 855 or the limitation from 856. So I checked the box and let's select our record now. It was PYIC. In fact, let's just grab it from the code so we make sure that we don't have any typos. Paste it in the prompt here and select the record. Okay, and what event? It is row init. What's the name of our service? It started with web. Let's type in the word web and see what comes up. What was it? Web PY? PY mask. Okay, perfect. We'll select that one. Okay, now processing sequence. Post or pre? Pre means run before. Post means run after. Now, it doesn't really matter in this case, I don't think, because Oracle's code isn't using any masking. But I like to do post-processing. Post-processing ensures that my code runs last. So if Oracle's doing something that I don't like, for example, I can just undo that. And let's go ahead and save and reload. Watch the routing number there. Let's make sure that it does, in fact, get masked. Perfect. It's masked. Now, in this scenario, we configure data masking, which happens to be a newer capability of Page and Field Configurator. So there's a lot of overlap between event mapping and Page and Field Configurator, and rightly so, because Page and Field Configurator is a tool built on top of event mapping. Put another way, Page and Field Configurator wouldn't exist without event mapping. So here's a common question. When should I use Page and Field Configurator, and when should I use event mapping? The shorter answer is prefer Page and Field Configurator. Now, personally, I like writing code, but code is for developers. Page and Field Configurator is for business analysts. Event mapping can do a whole lot more than Page and Field Configurator. So save it for those opportunities, for the things you can't do with Page and Field Configurator. Okay, let's move on to drop zones. Drop zones are a feature new to 857 and extended with 858. In 857, drop zones allows us to insert content into Oracle-delivered Fluid pages. 858 adds support for Classic. There's some very important differences between Classic and Fluid. But first, the drop zone rules. The first rule is that an Oracle-delivered page must include a drop zone placeholder. I'll show you one in just a minute. And secondly, wait, that's the only rule. So here's the difference between Classic and Fluid. A Fluid page may have placeholders anywhere. A Classic page only has placeholders at the bottom. Another important difference between Classic and Fluid is that Fluid pages are littered with drop zones. They're everywhere, and that's good. But Classic and HR, they are only present on a couple of setup pages, such as locations. So I asked PeopleSoft Strategy this question. Why didn't you give us drop zones on transaction pages, such as job data? And the answer was, because we're converting them to Fluid. Oh, that's a great answer. So the answer is job data now has drop zones because we now have Fluid job data. Oh, and what about Campus Solutions? To date, there are no Campus Solutions drop zone placeholders. So here's a question. Do we have to wait for Oracle to deliver placeholders? The answer is yes. It doesn't make sense for us to add placeholders because that would require us to modify the Oracle delivered page. And isn't that the point of a drop zone? To avoid customizations? So let me introduce you to this scenario. Now let's start with the addresses page. So home, employee self-service, personal details, addresses. And you see that addresses has this standard employee self-service header. In fact, most self-service pages have this header. But I found one that doesn't. You ready for it? Here, let's go back. Employee self-service, payroll. It's direct deposit. Now we have a 3-step process for applying drop zones. It starts with step 1, investigate the transaction. Step 2 is create a subpage with your content. And step 3 is to apply that drop zone configuration. In fact, we covered this in great detail in our Fluid and Delta classes with a variety of different scenarios. So let's apply these steps to direct deposit. So step 1, we need to investigate the transaction. Okay, now we have the page open, don't we, in Application Designer. So PYIC DIRDEP FL. I don't see any drop zones here. Okay, let's drill through to the subpage. And perfect, I see a drop zone at the top, and I see a drop zone at the bottom. Now, drop zones are represented by the PT-ERC subpage stub. It's the placeholder page, and drop zones are wrapped or encompassed with a special related content group box. Now, tip for you, if you're interested in finding all pages within your database that have drop zones, the fastest way is to open that subpage and then choose Edit Find Definition References. That'll give you a printout, a list of every single drop zone within your database. Now, anything we insert into the drop zone becomes part of the component buffer at runtime. So for example, inserting a grid into a drop zone causes all content below the grid to shift a level in the component buffer. There's a solution for this, and we cover it in our drop zones classes. Okay, so step 1 is complete. We investigated, we found a drop zone, and we like the component buffer structure. The second step is to build our content. Drop zone content is always a subpage. So we need to create a subpage, and the target here is Fluid. So here's a question. Should I create a Fluid page or a Classic page? Here's the answer. It doesn't matter. What matters is the content. And we talk about why it doesn't matter in our Fluid 1 class. So let's create a new page, and let's just choose Fluid because that is the target here. And we'll choose a layout here from the list. We'll choose PSL Simple SBP. See the SBP there? It kind of gives the idea it's designed for subpages, doesn't it? So let's go ahead and create a new page. So I'll choose PSL Simple SBP, and let's give it a name. How about Web DD HDR SBF, SBF for subpage Fluid. Okay, let's see, let's press the OK button, and oh, it wants to know if we should save the people code. You know, that's a great question. Okay, so let's think about this for a minute. The target here, we're creating a subpage. Subpages don't trigger page activate. So copy or don't copy, it doesn't matter. The result's the same. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I'm going to say no. And since this is a subpage, let's be sure to mark it as a subpage. So on the Use tab, We'll choose subpage. And now let's go ahead and add our content. So here's what we want to add. We're going to insert an image. It's going to be a data-bound image. We're going to put a name in there. And, I want a third field. How about, so it's going to be image, name. How about employee ID? And each of these fields is going to be related. So they're going to be related display. But you know what you need for related display? That's right. You need a display control field, don't you? Something that is already in the component buffer that we can use as a key for the other fields. Has to exist in the component buffer above our related fields. So let's go back to that main page, this one here. And let's see if we can find something like the employee ID. And oh, perfect. There it is. Let's just go ahead and copy that. And then we can paste it here on the page. And let's just go ahead and start adding that content. So we want a data-bound image. Let's see, the data-bound image. Oh, you know what? Before we go any further, let's make sure these properties are correct. It's going to be a display control field, and absolutely, it's invisible. Perfect. Okay, so this one, the content is going to come from user ph page VW. It's a view delivered in HR that by employee ID gives us a photo. Now the data comes out of other PeopleTools tables. So this is a view, it's only in HR, but I've recreated it in both financials and campus solutions. The data exists in those systems. This view doesn't, so you can recreate it though. User ph page VW, employee photo. Let's go to the use tab, mark it as related to employee ID. And now we'll go to the fluid tab. We want to add some style classes here. It's going to be PSC_data-image. And beside that, doesn't have to be that big. This is fluid, and fluid controls layout. So beside that, let's put a data entry field. This is going to be for the name. And let's see, let's grab that from personal data. Personal data happens to be a reporting record. And in HR, my favorite name field happens to be name display. Now, I don't know why name display doesn't exist in the financials database. I guess through drive work records, etc., you could recreate it. I don't know why it's not there, but it's not. We don't really need the label. If somebody sees their name there, odds are pretty good they know it's their name. So we probably don't have to tell them, hey, this is your name. So let's go ahead and turn off the label. Now, this is really interesting what I'm about to do right here. On the style classes, I'm going to add a style class. It is PSC_label-none. Okay, isn't that weird? See, I just turned off label, but I'm going to the fluid tab and I'm doing the same thing again. That seems kind of weird, doesn't it? So here's how it works. When you add a data entry field to a page, PeopleSoft, of course, gives it a label. And if you add multiple data entry fields to a fluid page, you get stacked vertically multiple data entry fields with the labels right aligned on the left and data entry fields left aligned on the right. Now, let's say that on one of those fields, you decide to turn off the label. Well, your data entry fields will still left align on the right side of those columns, leaving all the labels, but you'll just have one data entry field below all the others that doesn't have a label, but is still horizontally aligned in the same column as all the rest. That's what happens when you say label none. Okay, now how it really works through the CSS is PeopleSoft reserves 33% of the parent container width for the label. So if you look at every single field, they all consume 100% of the width, label and data entry. They consume 100% of the container. 33% is reserved for the label. The remainder is for the data entry field portion. So when you say label none, PeopleSoft marks the label as invisible, but still reserves that 33%. Okay, let's think about it from the perspective of the self-service header. Let's see, let's go back to personal details, addresses. Okay, what that would mean is that the name field there takes up 100% of the page, but 33% would be the label. So what we would see is the name here actually jumping over 33% of the way across the screen, reserving space for a label we're not using. So when we use that style class, PSC_label-none, we're telling PeopleSoft is don't reserve space for the label. Allow the data entry field to go all the way to the left. Okay, now this also needs to be display only and a related field related to employee ID. And then back on the fluid tab, we're going to use a special style class here. It's PSC_data-primary. Now the primary style class only works in that custom header section. The header section here at the bottom, the page header segment It only works when it's wrapped in a special group box. We'll get to that in just a minute. So PSE data-primary, I like it. Let's copy it. We'll use that same styles for the Empl ID field. Let's just grab it from the same record. Empl ID, go to the label again, say none. This time though, let's use PSE data-secondary. Now, do we really need to display the Empl ID? No, in fact, the most common is to display the primary job, which would be awesome. I just don't happen to have the business logic in front of me to pull up the primary job. Maybe that'd be a little extra people code anyway. But using Empl ID gives me an opportunity to demonstrate yet another style class. Okay, let's see. It's display only related field. We have our fluid attributes there. Perfect. Let's go to our order tab, make sure that the image shows up first. We have photo, display name, Empl ID. We have the Empl ID coming from the display control is at the top. This is all perfect. Okay, now we need to add some group boxes for layout. And we don't have time today to go into all of the details of these group boxes. We cover them in great detail in our Fluid 2 class, but here, let me show you. So first we need the outer group box that we'll use to identify, to tell PeopleSoft, hey, this content needs to be reparented into the header section. It's the page header. So we're going to use group box type of custom header bottom. Custom header bottom. We'll clear the label. Some of these special group boxes, the labels are visible. We don't want this one visible. And then we'll put another group box inside here. In this one, we will use the label. We use the label for documentation purposes. PS apps page header is the style class. So a question a lot of people ask is, hey, Jim, how do you know about all these style classes? There's a great document out there. It is the Fluid UI CSS guide. You can find it on My Oracle Support. Let's mark this group box as layout only. And that looks great. Okay, we need one more group box. So the image here, the image is actually floated to the left. And when you float content, what happens is the web browser removes it from the flow of the page. So the content below actually might float, or actually we should say the image might float over the top of the content below. So what we need to do is reset that float. And that's the purpose of this group box. PSC_float-clear overflow. And since others might wonder, hey, I see a group box there. What's the purpose of that group box? Let's show them. We'll use the group box label as documentation. The group box type is layout only so that the group box title will not be visible. We'll save. Okay, so step 1, we investigated the transaction. Step 2, we created our content for our drop zone. Step 3, configure our drop zone. So let's go into configuration. And let's see, we can repurpose one of these windows. So I want to navigate into PeopleTools, Portal, and down at the bottom, you'll find Configure Drop Zones. We give it our component name. It happens to be PYIC dir, I don't know. Good thing is we can use a wildcard there. So I'll put a wildcard in, do a search. You know, the first time I approached this page, I thought, oh, and this was, again, beginning of 857. I thought, oh, let's find all of the components that have drop zones. So I just put a wildcard in here, just blanket, wildcard. Hit the search key, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited until it returned all the results. And I thought, wow, every component in PeopleSoft has a drop zone? That can't be right, because it wasn't. This doesn't return just components with drop zones. It returns all components. So you need to know in advance whether or not your component has a drop zone, which is why we went through the experience earlier to investigate, to determine, hey, does our component actually have drop zones we can configure? Okay, here we find PYIC dir-dep FL. We'll select it. And oh, wow, that's a lot of drop zones. 12 rows. Now the drop zone we want is on a subpage, isn't it? Suffix SBF. Do you see any SBFs here? I don't see any SBFs here. Instead, I see SCS. What are those? Those are secondary fluid pages. I see a lot of those. But I see these down here, the FL pages. Well, let's go back to Application Designer. And let's see, we have PYIC dir-dep FL. That's the top level page containing our subpage. Now, subpages can contain drop zones, and drop zones can contain drop zones. So it could get a little bit confusing, perhaps, to find which drop zone relates to the content. So I start by looking at the pages in the dropdown list. If I don't see my page, then I say, okay, what's the container page? Because subpages don't show up here. I find my container page and I say, okay, now there could potentially be, well, there could be an infinite number of drop zones here, depending on subpages and pages with subpages and pages with drop zones. So how do I ensure that I'm selecting the exact one that I want? That's the idea here. So we see the tab order and we see the record.field, or depending on your tools release, you might actually see the group box label here. So the group box label, the point there is to help us identify, okay, DZ top of page. This might have said DZ top of page depending on your tools release and your implementation. I've seen it both ways. Or you might see record and field. But I do see the tab order. This is your absolute definitive reference right here. Going to the order, I can find tab order number 4. There's tab order number 4. And I can confirm that it's using the same record and field. Same record and field. Now it is possible, unlikely, but it is possible, you could have one primary page with multiple subpages. Those multiple subpages could have multiple drop zones. And those multiple drop zones could have the same tab order. So it is possible through subpages that you could have one primary page with, say, tab order 4, but see tab order 4 listed multiple times. That's why I work through that hierarchy, starting from the page, going to the tab order, then going to the record and field. Okay, now that we've identified, we know that we're looking at the correct record and field, we can put in our page. So web DD, this is great. Right here in the prompt, since I'm configuring fluid, it's only going to show me fluid subpages. Subpages, not all fluid pages, only pages with the subpage type selected. And since it knows we're working with fluid, it's only going to show us fluid versions. Likewise, in 858, when you're configuring classic, it only shows you classic subpages. All right, let's see. Let's see if this worked out. So let's refresh. Wrong page. Direct deposit. Let's refresh. Perfect. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, so we have an extra minute. How about we do one more drop zone configuration? And so back to Application Designer, I'm going to create one new page. Page fluid. Let's do a drop zone at the bottom of the page. Let's keep this one super simple. So let's see, PSL simple SBP, give it a name. How about web DD disclaim? We'll do a quick disclaimer for the bottom of the page. Now, normally you would probably use a message catalog entry for the text, but here, let's just go ahead and stick a static text field here, and we'll just put in some text here. And so, because we want to protect direct deposit, we might actually tell people, hey, you need to wait a pay cycle to ensure that direct deposit goes through correctly. So let's just do that as disclaimer. Note, changes will take effect after one payroll. Something simple like that. Say okay and save. And we need to mark it as a subpage. So we'll go to the Use tab, mark this as a subpage, press the OK button. Since we're already on the subpage configuration, we can just come right in here, web DD, and what's the name of our page? What do we call it? Save web DD disclaim. Did we in fact mark it as a subpage? Subpage. Okay, there it is. Perhaps I didn't save it. Web DD disclaim. Okay, let's press a save button. And let's go back to the direct deposit page. And there's our disclaimer appearing at the bottom. Not bad, but I wanted to have an opportunity to share another style class or two with you, which is really why I chose this extra exercise here. So let's see, let's go to note changes will take effect on next payroll. Let's come in here. I think that could be bold. That might help it stand out a little better. So how about PSC_strong? Okay, and now let's see. That should make the text bold. Okay, looking at the alignment, it lines up pretty well with the sides of the page there, doesn't it? What if we wanted it offset a little bit? Well, that's what I would call a layout issue. And we have a saying here in our Fluid class. So when we teach Fluid, we say, if you give a developer a layout issue, the developer is going to ask for a group box, because the answer to every layout issue is a group box. So let's go ahead and throw another group box on the page. And for best practices, we want to specify any style classes we're going to use as documentation as a label on the group box. How about PSC underscore padding dash standard? I love these Oracle standard classes because well, you and I don't have to decide which should the padding be. Do we want 2 pixels, 4 pixels, 0.5 EMs? Doesn't matter. How does PeopleSoft define it? What does the PeopleTools team think, or more appropriate, what do the graphics designers working for Oracle think is the appropriate standard padding? Let's use it. And we can see that helps offset the content just a little bit more. All right, great. So here's a question that comes up often. Would you ever add drop zones to your own pages? This is a great question. And the answer, it depends. No, really. The short answer is no. If it's your page, just change it. There's no reason to insert a drop zone. It doesn't help with configuration. It's your page. But this is the it depends. What if you're a bolt-on developer, such as, for example, Gideon Taylor, or PS Web Solutions, or Smart ERP? They'll have their own components that they sell and deliver to us as customers. In that case, absolutely. I think this is a fantastic use case for drop zones. Bolt-on developers should definitely include configurable drop zones in their products for the same reason Oracle includes drop zones in its products. So while we're discussing Fluid, I want to show you something I put together. It's a proof of concept showing what you can do with Fluid and say a little bit of JavaScript. So here, let's find a page. Let's return to Manage Your Self-Service, and let's view My Team. Now this is an Oracle delivered component, and it has a standard flex grid on the page, but using some people code and some CSS, the applications team transformed it to look like a series of cards. Well, how did they do that? So using people code, they switched the grid type from standard flex grid to a div grid, and then apply some CSS to give us that fancy looking cards. And you'll notice that as I resize the page, those cards do move around to fill or fit the space. But at the end of the day, you can see it's still a grid. So we can still sort by any of the information that's in that grid. Well, I was thinking that's cool. And I got to thinking, how might I do that differently? What are some alternatives to the layout they have here? So I put together a prototype. And so on my direct reports here, it's a page that I created that, as you can see, is modeled after my team. So I can see it's just a standard flex grid like theirs. And I said, okay, so instead of just doing list view and card view using the div grid and CSS, what if instead we paired that up with some JavaScript? What if instead of using div grid, we used a data grid? Now a data grid, it takes the data from the grid, from the row set, converts it into a JavaScript object. And from a JavaScript object, we can do whatever we want with it. Create some data visualizations using something like D3. Or perhaps in this case, I paired it up with Oracle Jet. Oracle Jet is the Oracle JavaScript library that's included with PeopleTools. That's a really cool thing about Oracle Jet. It's included with PeopleTools. Well, where does Oracle Jet originally come from? Oracle Jet is a JavaScript extension created or blessed by the Oracle development team, and then used to develop a lot of the Oracle Cloud services, primarily on the PaaS side. But as I resize this window, you notice that we see a nice animation there using something that we call the masonry grid. See, if each of these tiles happen to be a different size, the masonry grid would recalculate to figure out where should we put those tiles so that they fit well together. Just to show you another quick example from the home pages. Have you seen a home page that has tiles with different shapes? And then you see some awkward spacing around them? I think that's a great use case for the masonry layout. See, with the masonry layout, the content would have reflowed so that the tiles would fit appropriately in the correct locations. Anyway, the way that I did this was starting with just a standard flex grid, change the grid type to a data grid so it becomes JavaScript, or the data is available to JavaScript. And then I imported the Oracle Jet libraries from the PeopleSoft web server because they're already there, and then wrote a little bit of JavaScript and a little bit of HTML to pair it all up together. One more example here, the film strip. So the film strip, again, it's just another Oracle Jet component showing us the exact same data. Again, it's still a grid. It's still grid data. If I had a row click handler, I could still invoke that row click handler. So clicking on a row, if there was one, would still invoke any field change people code behind the row click button. So all of these configuration options and ideas are great, but we've been looking at Fluid mostly, haven't we? Here's the reality. Roughly 90% of all PeopleSoft components are still classic. See, every PUM release, I download the PUM and I do a calculation. I have some SQL that looks at the component flag to determine how many components are classic and how many are Fluid. And then I run statistics on that. And what I found is that about 90%, actually it's closer to 95 if you do a total count, 95 of the components in the system are still classic, but we could probably say that, say, 3 to 5% of those Fluid components are replacing some classic. So we'll be fair, we'll be generous, and we'll say 90% are still classic components. So with these configuration options, I mean, event mapping is great on classic, but what about drop zones? Well, 858 supports them, but availability is lacking. What about data grids? That's a Fluid only thing, isn't it? We can't do that with classic. So the simple answer, how do we add content to an Oracle delivered classic page, is through related content. And related content has been here with us for a very long time. So here, we need a component. How about, let's drill into, let's go to Workforce Admin, Job Information, Job Data. Okay, next thing we need is some content that we want to add. How about let's do a data visualization. You see at Open World in 2019, that was the first release of 858, and we were dazzled in the Oracle presentations with data visualizations using Kambana. And as I sat there in the audience, I thought, wow, that is awesome. But what data would I want to visualize? What visualization would help me as a direct report to do my job? So let's start with that as our problem. Now, job data has effective dated rows. And here's my problem. When I open an employee job record, I see one effective dated row. I see the current row and perhaps any future dated rows that might be out there. But what happened in the past? How many history rows are here? Now we can view them. I mean, I can go down here and I can choose include history. But then if I just see a lot of rows, 1 row, 15 rows, 200 rows, what's the relationship between those rows? You know, scrolling through them or view all, I don't see any really good way to visualize that relationship. So this is what I came up with. What if we plotted those effective dates on a timeline? Then we could see the relationship. When did these actions happen? So let's do that. This is what I did. I created a PeopleSoft component to visualize effective dates, and I related it to the current component using related content, passing the EMPL ID and the EMPL record to the related content to view a timeline. And now with this timeline, I can see the entire history of what happened. I can see, okay, Roberta Jordan was hired on January 1st of 1980 and terminated on December 31st, 1999. And if we were to add in a little bit more JavaScript here, we could actually cause this, and maybe with some event mapping, we could cause this to drill directly to specific effective dated rows. And I can see a position change. I can see the whole history here. Isn't that fantastic? Now, if you're interested in recreating this specific job history report, we created a YouTube playlist for you. So be sure to check that out on our YouTube channel. Now, step-by-step instructions, including source files, showing how to recreate this specifically for job data, but you can definitely adapt it to any other effective data. I want to wrap up by telling you about an upcoming event. Join us on February 11th for an integration-focused one-day training webinar. That's one full day of modern integration training. On February 11th, I'll build several REST-based integrations, both producing and consuming REST. I'll show you how to generate, parse, and process JSON using a variety of options, including documents and native JSON objects. I'll introduce you to debugging and development tools such as SoapUI. And we'll walk through security scenarios such as basic authorization and bearer tokens. We'll talk about hard-coded and dynamic credentials, and for that matter, hard-coded and dynamic URLs, Now, I don't want to give too much away and spoil the surprise, but expect many examples using popular cloud services. And even though Rust and JSON are the most popular technologies today, we'll include a heavy dose of SOAP and XML as well. Now, space is limited, so be sure to register now at ib2021.jsmpros.com. That is IB as an integration broker, 2021.jsmpros.com. And yes, we are recording this one-day event, so be sure to register to gain access to the recording so you can follow along and build the same integrations in your own system. And to make sure you don't miss any announcements, we regularly post on YouTube, our blog, and social media, so be sure to subscribe for the latest updates so you don't miss an event. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you online for our next major event.